Most survivors enter collapse carrying a fatal misconception. They believe dirt is merely discomfort, a cosmetic nuisance they can ignore while chasing food, shelter, or weapons. That belief is the seed of their downfall. In a world where antibiotics are relics and clean water is a currency more expensive than blood, hygiene becomes less about appearance and entirely about operational longevity. Filth is not harmless. It is bacterial acceleration, fungal invasion, parasite incubation, and skin layer degradation. When the old world ended, the buffer between a minor irritation and a systemic infection vanished with it. Many fail because they cling to the civilian assumption that the body can tolerate neglect. It cannot. Not here. Steam becomes the decisive pivot. It is the only form of cleansing that does not subtract from your water reserve, the only method capable of penetrating grime, loosening sweat crust, neutralizing pathogens, and resetting your physiological baseline without draining the fluid that keeps you alive. Survivors who understand this treat steam as a strategic asset, not comfort. They use it to erase odor signatures that reveal their position, to maintain skin integrity that prevents infection, and to preserve cognitive clarity that reduces lethal decision-making errors. The 7 tools ahead are not conveniences. They are survival instruments engineered from scarcity. Ignore them, and the collapse won't need bullets or hunger to finish you. Your own skin will do it instead. In collapse conditions, the doctrine of waterless decontamination replaces every outdated assumption you carried from the civilized world. You no longer cleanse to feel refreshed. You cleanse to remain operational. Water is no longer a tool. It is a strategic reserve that cannot be sacrificed to vanity, routine, or the illusion of normalcy. When every milliliter becomes contested territory, the question shifts from "how do I wash?" to "how do I sterilize?" without surrendering resources I cannot replace? The answer is heat, vapor, controlled exposure. You are not simulating cleanliness. You are executing microbial disruption through thermal force. Steam becomes a substitute for liquid contact, a medium that bypasses scarcity by transforming minimal moisture into maximal effect. The doctrine is simple. Heat replaces volume. Vapor replaces pressure. Surface sterilization replaces any expectation of immersion or rinsing. You do not need water flowing across your skin. You need pathogen collapse along your skin. Steam achieves this with precision when applied through the right tools. Each device in this list exists for a singular purpose: to produce, concentrate, and deliver steam in a way that decontaminates the entire body while consuming almost nothing. These are not improvised conveniences. They are operational systems built from ruin, scrap metal, stone debris, decaying vegetation, fractured insulation, ruptured containers. They embody the post-collapse principle that survival relies less on what you have and more on how you convert scarcity into capability. The doctrine demands discipline. Mismanage heat, and you injure yourself. Misjudge steam exposure, and you leave bacterial colonies intact. Treat the tools casually, and they fail when you need them most. Apply them with precision, and your hygiene becomes an invisible weapon, one that shields you from infections the collapse has no cure for. This doctrine is not advice. It is policy for staying alive. The scrap metal heat chimney is the first true test of whether a survivor understands post-collapse engineering. It is not a stove, not a heater, and not a comfort device. It is a vertical thermal engine built to convert the smallest fuel input into a concentrated column of rising steam capable of stripping microbial load from the body. Its effectiveness depends entirely on how ruthlessly you shape, seal, and position the scavenged metal. a fractured ventilation duct, a rusted exhaust pipe, a severed water heater sleeve. Any elongated metal cylinder becomes the backbone of the chimney. The longer and narrower the structure, the more aggressively it channels heat upward, compressing energy that would otherwise dissipate uselessly into the air. At the chimney's base, you establish a micro-fire chamber, a shallow cradle of stone or broken masonry that reflects heat inward instead of leaking it outward. Fueled by twigs, paper scraps, fabric shreds, or any biomass that burns hot and fast, this chamber generates the initial thermal surge. Just above it, you mount a tiny reservoir, no more than a cup's worth, using a dented can or cut metal bowl. The reservoir does not exist to hold water. You feed it with condensation, captured runoff, or even moisture extracted from wet vegetation. The goal is not quantity, the goal is conversion. As the metal heats, that trace moisture flashes into vapor, and the chimney funnels it upward with escalating pressure. Your body becomes the final interface. Standing above the chimney requires discipline. Maintain distance, monitor airflow, angle yourself to intercept the steam without exposing skin to direct metal contact or uncontrolled heat bursts. Done correctly, the rising column envelops the limbs, torso, and joints, softening sweat crust, opening pores, and disrupting bacterial footholds. The chimney's efficiency makes it invaluable in territories where fuel is scarce and water is sacred. Its greatest strength is its simplicity. No moving parts, no fragile components, only heat, metal, and gravity. Yet the majority misuse it by overloading the fire, flooding the reservoir, or standing too close, turning a controlled sterilization tool into a burn hazard. Respect the chimney, and it becomes a silent ally. Misjudge it, and it punishes you. The thermal stone reboiler pit is the antithesis of the metal chimney. Slower, heavier, deceptively primitive, yet capable of producing deep, saturating steam long after the fire itself has died. Its value lies in thermal inertia. Stone remembers heat. It absorbs, stores, and releases energy with a patience that metal cannot match, making it the ideal engine for waterless sanitation when fuel is limited and time is your only true resource. The pit begins with a simple depression carved into soil, rubble, or collapsed flooring. Into this cavity you lay the foundation. Basalt chunks if you find them, but broken concrete, ceramic tiles, or brick debris will suffice. The key is mass. The more material you pack into the pit, the more heat you trap. Ignition is not the objective. Saturation is. Build a hot, dense fire over the stones and let it burn until the rock bed glows from within. You are not heating the air above. You are feeding energy deep into the pit's core. When the flames collapse into embers, remove the remnants with improvised tongs or a scrap shovel. What remains is a reservoir of silent heat waiting for activation. Moisture, not water, powers the system. Fistfuls of green vegetation, damp soil, or even clothing lightly misted with breath provide the activation source. When placed over the stones, these materials release their latent moisture in a rush of vapor. The pit turns that vapor into a slow, steady exhale of steam that rises in waves rather than bursts, giving the body a more uniform and penetrating cleanse than the sharper column generated by a metal chimney. Positioning is tactical. Kneel or stand over the pit with calculated distance, allowing the heat to envelop you without overwhelming your skin. The wider dispersion of steam makes it ideal for full body coverage, especially for the back and lower limbs, areas often missed by narrower devices. The reboiler pit's longevity is its strategic advantage. Long after the fire is gone, the stones continue releasing steam in cycles, allowing extended decontamination without additional fuel or moisture. What makes this tool indispensable is its reliability. Metal rusts, fuel dwindles, and weather shifts, but stone endures. Treat the pit as a patient engine, and it will outlast nearly every other device in your arsenal. The fabric condensation cloak is the first tool in this doctrine that treats steam not as something you stand above, but something you wear, capture, and bend to your will. It converts rising vapor into a moving chamber that follows the contour of your body, forcing heat and moisture to linger long enough to break down grime, soften sweat residue, and suffocate bacterial colonies. Most survivors underestimate cloth because they associate it with insulation rather than conduction. In collapse logic, fabric becomes an atmospheric container, one that manipulates heat the way a sail manipulates wind. The cloak begins with material selection. Wool scraps, fire-retardant blankets, thick denim panels, or layered cotton salvage are ideal. Thin fabric leaks steam too quickly. Synthetic material melts or releases toxins when exposed to heat. What you need is density, breathability, and structural weight. Construction is minimal but deliberate. The cloak must be wide enough to drape around your shoulders and long enough to create a tent-like seal from neck to knee. You shape it so that steam rising from a chimney, pit, or heated biomass collects inside instead of dispersing into open air. The cloth traps vapor, forcing it to condense against your skin in a slow, deliberate cycle. This condensation is the weapon. In a world without water, these droplets are the closest you come to a rinse, dissolving salt, lifting oils, and carrying microbial debris away from pores as the heat forces circulation beneath your skin. Movement becomes part of the protocol. You shift, rotate, and adjust the cloak to direct vapor to neglected zones, underarms, groin, spine, and the creases that harbor the most bacterial growth. Discipline is essential. Too close to the heat source and the cloth scorches. Too far and the vapor escapes. When used correctly, the condensation cloak becomes a mobile steam chamber, turning whatever environment you're in into controlled sanitation territory. It transforms scarcity into cleansing pressure and forces the collapse to yield one of its rare luxuries: full body reset without expenditure. The enclosed micro-steam box is the most aggressive form of waterless sanitation a survivor can build, a compact chamber that amplifies every fragment of heat and every wisp of vapor into a full-body sterilization environment. It is not comfortable. It is not elegant. It is a containment device designed to trap you inside a controlled thermal assault that strips pathogens from your skin with an efficiency no open-air method can match. The box begins with whatever rigid debris the collapse provides. Broken pallet boards, vehicle doors, shattered cabinet panels, insulation sheets scavenged from abandoned structures. Precision is irrelevant. Containment is everything. Gaps must be minimized, corners reinforced, and interior surfaces angled to reflect rising heat back toward the occupant. You are building a pressure vessel, not a shelter. Inside, space should be barely enough for a crouched or kneeling posture. Confinement is intentional. The smaller the chamber, the less steam required to reach saturation, and the faster the environment becomes hostile to microbial survival. You do not generate the steam from within. That is how amateurs injure themselves. Instead, the heat source sits outside, feeding controlled vapor through an intake tunnel, often nothing more than a piece of ducting, a severed exhaust tube, or a hollow branch. This separation prevents direct exposure to flames or superheated metal, allowing only vapor to enter the chamber. Once activated, the box becomes a thermal trap. Steam accumulates with nowhere to escape, compressing, thickening, clinging to your skin in rolling layers. Within minutes, sweat surfaces, grime softens, pores open, and microbes lose their foothold. Every breath becomes a reminder that you are purging not just your body, but your operational liabilities. In a world where infection spreads faster than information, this chamber is a recalibration device. But the micro steam box is not forgiving. Misjudge ventilation, and you risk suffocation. Overfeed the steam line, and condensation becomes scalding runoff. Structural weakness leads to collapse or thermal leakage that renders the chamber useless. Discipline transforms the box into a strategic asset. Complacency turns it into a coffin. Treat it as a machine of survival, one that demands respect equal to its effectiveness, and it will grant you a level of decontamination impossible by any other improvised means. The biosteam generator is the only tool in this doctrine that produces vapor without fire, metal, or high fuel cost. It weaponizes decomposition, fermentation heat, and botanical moisture, turning the slow processes of nature into a steady, low-grade steam source that functions even when your environment denies you ignition. In collapse conditions, this becomes strategic superiority. Fire reveals your location, consumes resources, and exposes you to detection. Fermentation does none of these. It works silently beneath the threshold of danger, creating a persistent thermal rise capable of cleansing the body without advertising your position. Construction begins with a sealed container. Cracked plastic barrels, fractured compost bins, salvaged coolers, even deep canvas sacks lined with tarp. Into this vessel, you pack layers of wet vegetation, pulped stalks, fungal clusters, crushed sapwood, and any organic debris that holds moisture. The objective is density. The tighter the mass, the more heat the microbes generate as they break down the material. As the core temperature rises, vapor collects along the internal surfaces and seeks escape, creating a natural exhale of warm, humid air. You guide that exhale through a narrow funnel or improvised duct, channeling it toward the body. The steam is gentler than fire-based devices but more constant, ideal for survivors recovering from injuries, dealing with skin abrasions, or maintaining hygiene during prolonged concealment. The generator's advantage is endurance. Once the microbial engine stabilizes, it can produce usable vapor for days with minimal maintenance. Add fresh biomass to the top layer, vent excess condensation, and the system resets itself. Mismanagement, however, turns the generator into a hazard. Excess moisture drowns microbial activity. Insufficient airflow fosters mold bloom that poisons rather than purifies. Precision keeps the device alive, and in return, it keeps you clean when flame is forbidden and water is absent. In silence, it sustains you. The metal mesh sweat lift frame is a device built on a principle most survivors overlook. Your body is already carrying the moisture you need for sanitation. You simply don't know how to extract it. This frame does exactly that. It turns your own perspiration, breath humidity, and the trace moisture trapped in scavenged fabrics or gathered leaves into a renewable steam source that requires no water input, no combustion chamber, and almost no fuel. It is a heat amplifier, not a steam generator, and its efficiency depends entirely on geometry, airflow, and your willingness to endure controlled thermal exposure. The frame begins with structure, a sheet of wire mesh, a segment of metal grating, or even a lattice cut from refrigerator racks or collapsed fencing. Height matters more than width. The frame must stand upright, reaching from the ground to the level of your shoulders, creating a vertical, radiant plane. Once positioned over a modest heat source, a bed of coals, a smothered ember pile, or even heated stones, the mesh absorbs radiant energy and begins to warm at a pace far slower than metal cookware but far safer for skin. This slow rise is deliberate. It avoids scorching while building an invisible thermal boundary that draws moisture outward from anything placed upon it. Your clothing becomes the first amplifier. Drape a shirt, a jacket, or a cloth scrap across the mesh and watch as heat pulls residual moisture to the surface. That moisture vaporizes, creating a thin stream of rising humidity. Add vegetation, bark shreds, or damp soil in small quantities, and the effect multiplies. You are not trying to produce thick steam. You are generating a continuous veil of warm vapor that surrounds your body when you step into position. The sweat lift frame's strength is subtlety. Unlike the chimney or steam box, it does not assault the body with pressure. Instead, it coaxes sweat upward, loosens grime, and encourages the skin to shed microbial buildup through induced perspiration. This makes it invaluable for long-duration expeditions, concealed operations, or any scenario where combustion must remain minimal. It maintains hygiene without sound, without signature, without exposing you to risk. But the frame is not foolproof. Stand too close and you dehydrate the skin. Stand too far and the effect weakens to nothing. Overload the mesh and you smother the heat gradient that makes the system functional. Master the distance, manage the materials, and the sweat lift frame becomes the quietest, most discreet cleansing tool you possess. An invisible reset for the body when the world around you listens for every mistake. The Rupture Seal Steam Hood is the most intimate of all the tools. An enclosed head and neck chamber designed to purge the areas where collapse-era infections strike first and spread fastest. Sinus, throat, scalp, ears, jawline, the soft tissues that absorb airborne pathogens and collapse under neglect. This hood targets them with surgical intent. It is built from fragments the old world discarded. The dome of a ruptured fuel canister, the shell of a broken appliance, the severed top of an oil drum, even the hollowed casing of a motorcycle helmet. What matters is curvature and containment. A sealed dome traps steam. A flat panel only redirects it. Preparing the hood requires discipline. Edges must be smoothed with stone or wrapped in fabric to prevent laceration. Internal surfaces should be wiped of chemical residue. Inhaling the ghosts of industrial solvents is a faster death than infection. Once the structure is safe, cut or identify a single intake port, large enough to feed controlled vapor, small enough to prevent heat spikes. This port becomes the hood's lifeline. Operational use is precise. The heat source remains external, feeding steam through a duct, hose, or improvised channel. You never position your face above raw fire. Instead, you lower the hood over your head, allowing vapor to pool around your mouth, nose, ears, and scalp. Within moments, warmth floods the sinus cavities, loosening hardened mucus, flushing microbial buildup, and restoring airflow compromised by dust, smoke, and collapsed debris. The hood's internal humidity softens skin oils, dissolves particulates, and forces circulation into areas survivors rarely clean properly when water disappears. Psychologically, the hood becomes a reset chamber. In darkness and heat, your breathing becomes deliberate, your senses sharpen, and the noise of the outside world dissolves long enough for your nervous system to recalibrate. But the tool is not without danger. Excessive exposure risks dizziness, dehydration, or thermal irritation. Too much pressure in the intake channel forces scalding droplets onto the skin. Airflow mismanagement leads to suffocation risk. The hood demands vigilance, not surrender. Used correctly, it becomes a defensive perimeter for the body's most vulnerable entry points. In a world filled with airborne decay and particulate rot, the survivor who maintains their head and neck hygiene is the survivor who outlives the environment trying to infiltrate them. The 7 tools form a doctrine, not a collection. Alone, each device offers partial sanitation. Together, they create a full-spectrum hygiene cycle engineered for a world where water is absent, medicine is extinct, and mistakes are harvested by the environment without hesitation. This cycle is not ritual. It is maintenance of the biological machine you rely on to move, think, fight, and survive. You begin with heat generation, not for comfort but for microbial destabilization. The chimney or reboiler pit prepares the body, softening hardened layers, lifting oils, and forcing the first wave of sweat to carry contaminants outward. Once the skin is primed, you transition to the fabrics and enclosures that trap vapor long enough to transform it into pressure. The cloak and micro steam box. These devices do not cleanse. They purge. They force steam into every neglected crease, every fold of the body where bacterial footholds are strongest. When fuel is scarce or silence is required, the cycle shifts to low-signature tools. The biosteam generator provides sustained fireless humidity that maintains hygiene even during extended concealment. The sweat lift frame amplifies your own moisture output, ensuring you never depend on external water sources to remain clean. The Rupture seal hood finishes the sequence. It targets the entry points, sinus, throat, scalp, the vulnerabilities that end survivors quietly, long before their bodies fail. A single cycle executed with precision resets the entire system. Pores opened, contaminants released, pathogens disrupted, morale stabilized. This is the truth most survivors resist. Hygiene is not optional. It is operational readiness. A clean body sleeps deeper, moves faster, heals quicker, and makes fewer catastrophic decisions. In collapse, cleanliness is not virtue. It is armor. Those who maintain the cycle endure. Those who neglect it decay from the inside out, long before external threats have to lift a finger.